extend our thanks to our partners at Vermont Humanities, as well as to the generous underwriters who made it possible for us to offer such rich and robust programming. The sponsor of our entire snapshot season is the Vermont Department of Libraries and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Tonight, we come together from across the state to listen, to learn, and to be inspired in community. Before we begin, I have a few brief housekeeping items. So next Tuesday, October 3rd, the library is pleased to present Jamie Franklin, curator of the Bennington Museum, to discuss the museum's latest exhibition, Haunted Vermont. This presentation will tell many of the stories explored in the exhibition, such as the Bennington Triangle and the Manchester Vampire. In some instances, this discussion will dive a little deeper into the minutiae of Vermont's haunted past. Saturday, October 7th, join filmmaker Joel Gershon for a presentation of his documentary, Cirque du Cambodia. Cirque du Cambodia follows the journey of two youths who live out every child's fantasy, to run away from home and join the circus. But not just any circus, they dream of taking the stage with Cirque du Soleil, the largest theatrical company in the world. Next, Tuesday, October 10th, you can participate in a workshop on video storytelling and citizen journalism. These workshops will guide you through essential storytelling frameworks, camera techniques, and streamlined editing practices. The workshop is brought to you by GNAT-TV and led by Bert Grinstead and Keegan Douglas. Both are seasoned producers, writers, and directors. Last, the next Snapshot event hosted by the Brooks Memorial Library is The Joy of Lex with Public Radio's Martha Barnett on October 4th at 7 p.m. Please be sure to register online to receive a link to the live stream. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Jamie McCallum is Associate Professor of Sociology at Middlebury College. His research focuses on labor and work issues around the globe. His work has been featured in scholarly social science outlets, medical journals, as well as popular places like the New York Times, the New Yorker, Washington Post, and The Nation. His third book, entitled Essential: How the Pandemic Transformed the Long Fight for Worker Justice, was published by Basic Books in late 2022. He's an elected school board official in Addison County, a volunteer firefighter in Weybridge, and a board member of the Rights and Democracy Institute. Welcome, Professor McCallum.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to you guys for coming, and for the folks on Zoom. And thanks to the library for hosting this event. As was said, I'm from Weybridge. When I talk, I usually have to explain about Vermont, so I can skip that part this time. So I'm a sociologist at Middlebury. I'm a former labor organizer and still kind of an amateur labor organizer as a hobby. And so the last couple of years has been pretty exciting for me, given my scholarly interest and personal interest, political interest, given that there's been so much labor activity. And I'm going to talk about some of that, though it's not in the book because it's happening now, but I'll talk about some of that toward the end. So I'll just start off to say I used to write more scholarly material. I transitioned to writing more popular material a number of years ago because I wanted to write for mainstream presses and take ideas that were typically, mostly debates on the academic left about class and labor organizing and union power and labor history and mainstream them more. And so this book was the second one to try to do that. This other one, Worked Over, which came out in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, was another one. So I'll talk a little bit about both of them in the beginning and how they relate. I wrote Worked Over, and which basically is a research-driven polemic about the need to work less, and that's sort of all the horrors that have been wrought by overwork in the last couple of decades. And it came out, of course, in the middle of the time when tens of millions of people were unemployed. And it seemed very, maybe it was going to be tone deaf. So they were like, write another one. So I said, okay. So then I wrote a book on essential workers. But in my head, they were always sort of, related. So the first one really it's a history. For 20-some years in America, the hours of labor steadily declined from 12 per day to 10 to 8, and we almost got to 6 per day. This picture up here on the top is a picture of mostly of a women's brigade of organized workers, some of whom were in the Socialist Party, some of whom were in the Wobblies, the industrial workers of the world, campaigning for a 6-hour day, 1930 something. This other picture is a 2014 strike by Walmart workers, many of whom are demanding more time, more hours, stuff like that. And so to me, this discrepancy was interesting. So the hours of labor declined, and then we reversed course in the 70s. And we now work about 13% more hours than we did then. That's about 5 weeks per year. Now, what that means is that the 40-hour work week has remained the same, essentially. It's almost unchanged. But we've added weeks to the work week. This graph shows a map of the rise of annual hours and a rise of the map of the Gini coefficient, which is a typical measure of way of measuring inequality. So in the book, I elaborate a story where the decline of leisure and the rise of inequality are related. Leisure is expensive, and the profits that could have paid for it simply weren't shared by the people who were producing goods and services in the United States after 1975 or whatever. That date is a little bit mobile. So it talks about this reverse course and what has happened in its wake. It's important to say that when we think of people working long hours, we often think of basically well-paid, high-earning male professionals. And those people do work more hours than anybody else. They still top the charts of hours worked. But the change has been driven by the opposite kinds of people. People in the bottom fifth of the income distribution have increased their hours the most. You see here about 24% over the last few decades, compared to just a small percent of people in the top fifth. The basic story there is some people make money by earning higher salaries at working the same amount of hours to keep up with rising costs and inflation and schooling and healthcare and childcare. Other people, to make more money, have to work longer hours. And so there was a sort of a pull effect. Inequality had a pull effect, which encouraged more people who actually didn't want to be working full-time into full-time work. The bottom fifth of the income distribution is also, and the second fifth there is disproportionately workers of color, disproportionately women too. The change was driven mostly by those folks. Let me say something else along, where are we here? Where did that graph go? This book starts weird because the introduction is one thing, but the first chapter starts in 2009, much to the chagrin of the publisher who wanted it to start in 2020. But it starts in 2009. Why is that? This graph might be a little awkward to interpret, but in 2009, as the onset of the Great Recession and then forward, what this data shows essentially is that we erased a significant number of middle-income, middle-skill jobs and replaced them mostly with low-paying, quote-unquote, low-skill jobs. That language is obviously debatable, but it's often used. So the recovery from the Great Recession, the plan to do it was to erase middle-income jobs and replace them with lower-income jobs. It was those people, disproportionately, who ended up in the service sector. You remember 2009 is the birth of Uber, Lyft, TaskRabbit, whatever the other gig economy employers are. Those employers require a large number of unemployed people who can work anytime during the day for almost any amount of money. And that's sort of what you had all of a sudden. You had this huge unemployed labor pool. And so you sort of had the gigification or the sort of Uberification of the American middle and working class strata. This is important during the pandemic because this large group of service sector workers ended up being both unemployed during the pandemic early on or essential workers. So it was taken from this large pool that was essentially, to some extent, created. This picture is never as impressive as I want it to be when it's shown on a big screen. But what it shows, it took me as long to make this graph as it did to write the rest of the book. So I always have to show it because cell phone data is really hard to work with. But basically what it does is tracks all work-related movement by tracking your cell phone when you leave your house and go somewhere else for 8 hours. And then it shows where people go and how many of them do it. So in February 2020, this is a normal work day in New York City. In April 2020, this is a 66% reduction of work-related travel, which is huge. In the book, I go into different places where those lines are darkest, where you can track, when you measure it with CDC data, you can track COVID outbreaks. So where people were working, where people were traveling, the longer they stayed there, the more COVID outbreaks there were. There was a very early, clear, obvious, obviously we know this now, correlation between those two things. So this is what essential worker movement looked like in New York. You can do the same thing for different places. In New York, it was especially stark because the service sector is so predominant. It's not a manufacturing hub, obviously. And this really was the first ever service sector-driven recession. The last 5 in American history were mostly driven by manufacturing or agriculture. Because of my interest in labor time, I originally started, I began interviewing workers in Wuhan, and then, so basically, if you're trying to figure out what the pandemic did to work hours, oh, that's it. It sent it upwards early on. A lot of us worked during our saved commutes. A lot of us worked, especially parents. I have 2 young kids. You end up working from, 9 to 9:25, and then 10:01 to 10:16. Your day is constantly interrupted by all manner of things. And so many people reported not only just longer hours, but incredibly disjuncture and sort of precarious hours. We increased our post 8 p.m. work by like 90% because so many people were working through the night. Now we've sort of returned to our pre-pandemic norm of, whatever. It's still higher than it was 30 years ago, but it's, a little bit that norm. So, is this going to work again?
Let's try it.
Okay. This is literally what I deal with every day of my life when I teach, because this stuff is so hard. It was working before, that's weird. Well, I can come back to that slide. Is this on? Is this working now or not?
It was, but now it's not.
Okay. The book I wrote now, the essential book, has a very simple, but I think compelling argument. And that basically is that bad jobs are bad for the people who have them, and they're bad for everybody else too. good jobs are good for those people who have them, and they're good for the rest of us too. This incredibly, relatively simple point, I think has really compelling or really important implications. One is that we all have a stake. The American economy is addicted to bad jobs. It has like an affliction, an addiction, where that is what it's been producing for the past 45 years. In other words, jobs that are low paying, with precarious or either too long or too short hours at stagnating pay. With declining union membership and declining voice on the job. Those are the jobs that we tend to like to produce. And during the pandemic, it became really clear that those jobs are a risk for all of us. So if your local grocery store workers did not have paid sick leave, you were more at risk when you went to get groceries because they could not take time off. If your grocery store workers were not unionized or didn't have a voice in the job and therefore could not point out workplace hazards in the moment without fear of retribution, your grocery store when you went to shop was more dangerous. When long-haul truckers have to drive, have to work 80-hour weeks, there's more accidents on the road. When teachers don't have what they need to teach, our children don't have what they need to learn, right? So their working conditions are our living conditions. The old labor, lefties used to say that an injury to one is an injury to all. Or as the communists used to say, we're all better off when we're all better off. But either way, it was almost statistically true during the pandemic. This just changed? Conversely, if is this thing still on? Okay. Yeah, it's fine. It's supposed to be for that, but whatever. If those things are not there, if working conditions are better, obviously the rest of us get benefits from that. And I'll talk about healthcare work in a little bit about that. Let me see. So I'll talk mostly about three things. Labor organizing, workplace safety, and sort of a future-looking element, given what's going on now. Or actually, class formation, labor organizing, and then workplace safety. So early on in the pandemic, when I was interviewing people, if you interview workers for a living, as I mostly have done, it's easy to see they turn on each other. They turn on each other at the drop of a hat, actually. And we don't like to say this, especially people like me, but they do. And during the pandemic, they did not. And so during the pandemic, what was really interesting right off the bat was that janitors and nurses and doctors and ambulance drivers and nursing assistants in the same hospital all talked about each other as the same entity, as being in the same boat, as facing down the same crisis, because they were essential. They were working face to face. So there was a kind of thing where, there's a chapter in the book on the essential working class, a kind of like how did that class come into being, that class sort of understand itself. Sociologists tend to see class not just as a point of income on your paycheck, but as a process, right? As something that you do, as something that is an active thing. So workers really built very early on an essential class consciousness. You think it's going to happen or not?
We're going to restart the process and wait a minute.
Okay, cool.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. And so early on, people began to say stuff like, they just had a very one for all kind of attitude, and that is just unusual, especially from the top down. Like workers, the top end of the essential worker hierarchy, and there were some of those people, like doctors, some technicians. If you think about, what was considered essential at that time, now we look back on it as being rather clear. At the time, it was very it was very up for grabs. I had a fly fishing guide in Montana who never stopped working a day during the pandemic because fly fishing is Montana's one of their biggest tourist attractions in the summer, and the government didn't shut it down, right? So there's all kinds of ways in which employers and states used essentialness to sort of build, to some extent, a working class, and then workers took that and ran with it. Early on, strikes for teachers often involved nurses, often involved sometimes firefighters. I'm on the fire department. Firefighters joined some of those picket lines voluntarily, not picket lines, just protests, just to kind of show this sort of degree of solidarity. So I traced that sort of rise in the book. The fall of it happens almost just as quick. Like as soon as Biden's unemployment insurance scheme kicks in, and all of a sudden it does to some extent pay to stay home. It becomes safer, the vaccine rollout happens for essential workers, you can go back to work quicker. Workers began turning on each other, and they began to routinely say stuff like, we're out here, when we say essential workers, we mean the ones working. We're out here working our butts off, and some people are at home sitting on them, stuff like that. And it was very obvious that people were looking sort of within the class for arguments. The 2020 election really threw a wrench in those gears as well. Like, more red-aligned or Trump-aligned voters would come to work in the same workplace as other folks. And I talked to registered Democrats, and they would say, look, these people won't wear a mask, they won't get vaccinated, they're trying to kill us. How can you possibly have class solidarity in that kind of environment? So there was all kinds of things like that kind of threw that essential working class into question. It was most visible in action. So there were, the Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks strikes across the country. There was 8 in 2020, which is very small. It's about the same number as there was, I'm looking at this data, in, right in the midst of the Great Recession. Like there were very few. Of those 8, 4 were led by nurses. There were, however, when I would do interviews, I would talk to people, we had these, sort of wide-ranging conversations, and at the end, they would say, I would say anything else in the beginning of this pandemic, and they would say, oh, there was a walkout yesterday, or there was a sick out, or a bunch of us went on a noonday strike, or a labor organizer called us and we're meeting with him tomorrow, or whatever it was. And there was all this sort of bottom-up activity that was beginning to bubble up in all kinds of workplaces. American workers without unions do not take strike action. It's as sure as the sun comes up and down, it doesn't happen. And yet it happened during the pandemic. A third of the strikes, so there was about 100 smaller, fewer than 500 worker strikes in 2020. A third of them were led by non-union workers. A lot in food processing, a lot in motor manufacturing and auto, some in smaller ones in healthcare and education. So there was all this sort of very grassrootsy, bottom-up activity. And that activity also just happened to coincide with the Black Lives Matter protests of the summer of 2020, George Floyd. And so you had a really interesting moment of cross-pollination between the Black freedom movement and the labor movement, because leaders of both were in both. Like Chris Smalls, who's now famous for organizing Amazon, was a BLM activist. He wasn't really even a labor guy. He helped galvanize support in both worlds. And it turns out that a lot of the George Floyd protests had a lot to say about the conditions for blacks during the pandemic. Blacks were died, I think 14% higher, black essential workers died at a 14% higher rate than did white workers in the same job, because they were disproportionately exposed to the virus, for all kinds of reasons. In healthcare, in retail, they were often the front-facing employees, whereas white workers were often worked stockroom, backroom, low-level management, stuff like that. And those connections were made. The lack of connection between the Black freedom movement and the labor movement is probably its largest historical weakness or defeat. So the other thing that I would say galvanized a lot of people, workers during this time, was the public. You know, the American public is not historically known for its pro-union sentiment. You want me to plug this in?
Yeah.
It is just, that's not where it, magic, thank you. That's not where it, that's not where its sentiment lies, has lied historically. Now it does. And the pandemic, I think, had a lot to do with that. So there was moments when I talked to workers early on and they said, look, it's incredible. The invisibility we've always suffered from as retail workers or garbage collectors or low-level orderlies in healthcare or teachers is now magnified. Conditions for essential workers were like issues of national importance during the pandemic. And the same thing happened when workers began to sort of turn at each other. That did correspond with the time when the American public went from salute our healthcare heroes to nobody wants to work anymore. And that whole discourse about, you know, not wanting to work obviously still persists and happened almost overnight. So these signs went out all over workplaces. You know, people remember seeing these on social media, and you know, I saw some in person when I was driving around different states that were sort of shaming people for not showing up to work, for taking Biden's unemployment checks, which is what, of course, they were there for. There was all kinds of other reasons people weren't working, which I'll get to. Slowly but surely, workers began to change the narrative as they began to put in their own signs up. I have always liked this one on the bottom. I guess you're right. Capitalism will destroy this country. If it doesn't pay people enough to live their lives, why should they slave away for you? There was just a real sort of latent understanding that sort of bubbled to the surface that we had a system that did not somehow provide enough people to work essential services, to work in healthcare, to staff restaurants, to staff farms or food processing plants. And that discourse of nobody wants to work anymore really tended to deflate people's understanding of themselves as important servants in sort of the essential working class. It wasn't true, of course, and there was a lot of mystery as to why people weren't working, but it's actually not that. You can just look it up. The census asks you every week, why did you not work last week for money? And then you can just collect those results and make a very simple blue and red graph. So the blue ones are people who said they preferred not to work. The red ones are people who did not work because they had caregiving responsibilities. This was true sort of during the pandemic, but this data does extend beyond the heart of the pandemic too. It's still true. We've recovered about 85% of our child care capacity and about 88% of our elder care capacity since the pandemic, which means tens of thousands of people are still not working because they're caring for those people who don't have care anymore. I mean, I myself have been in this position when my child care place closed down and I had to stay home with my kid here and there. And so just plenty of that care economy did not survive the pandemic. So I always point to this when people start talking about this particular thing. Where are all the workers? I often say, well, they're in the red. They're in. That's one of the main things that they're doing. I'll talk a little bit about workplace safety, and this is a thing that I really focused on a lot in the book because of the threats caused by COVID. So unions have always been guarantors of workplace safety. Union workers enjoy better health care plans, which means you can go to the doctor sooner to get good care for things before it blows out of proportion. They're associated with smoking and alcohol cessation. They're associated with shorter hours and better schedules, which is ultimately better for your heart. There's always ways, and of course unions have been long arguers and defenders of safer work sites away from hazards and chemical mishaps and speed up in agriculture, stuff like that. I took two industries, nursing homes and education, because I used to be a nursing home organizer and because nursing homes were the epicenter of the pandemic. Also, I'm in education, and I have a keen interest in how those institutions fared. So I can talk forever about this, but I'll just paint a very, I'm glad this slide got put up there in time because it's a very clear illustration of what goes on. We did research on every nursing home in the country. There's about 16,000 nursing homes in America. I think they're about 15% unionized, which is double the national average, which is good, but it's still only 15%. If you or your loved one was in a nursing home in 2020, 21, and there was a union there, you were about 11% less likely to die of COVID. If you worked in one of those places and you had a union, you were 8 to 9% less likely to get infected. The reasons for this, so if you extrapolate, if you can imagine every nursing home in America becomes unionized, that's associated with 6,000 fewer excess deaths, which is a pretty significant number. The reason for this is relatively simple, is that union workers had better access to PPE, they had a quicker access to PPE, and they could point out hazards and weaknesses on the job without fear of management retaliation. So if you look at, there's publicly available data on all kinds of workplace safety measures. And if you look at them with just plain eyes, the first thing that you realize is that union workplaces are much more dangerous. They look more dangerous. There's higher levels of reported deaths, there's higher levels of reported hazards, injuries, sicknesses, stuff like that. Why is that? It's because they report injuries, sicknesses, hazards, and stuff like that, right? Because they comply with the law. There's a federal law that says you have to. Most healthcare establishments simply do not, because there's no punishment for not following the law. Union workers bargain into their contracts stipulations that employers have to follow federal health and safety laws dictated by OSHA. There are a few ways that you get workplace safety, that we think you get workplace safety. The one is macroeconomic. The way this works out, according to economists, is that if you can quit your job, then your boss is incentivized to make it better so that you don't quit, raising your wage a little bit, giving you better standards, conditions on the job, better hours, whatever it is. That, in other words, it's sort of the ability to exit, as it's formally called, is sort of an incentive to make that job better. The other way we get workplace safety is through OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is great, but it did not do its job in 2020. It investigated, I think, 6% of the cases where workers called them to investigate. It's underfunded, it's understaffed, it doesn't work, it didn't work. I'm not trashing OSHA, I'm just saying that's what happened. So workers had to defend themselves. They basically had to stand up for themselves. And where they could, they were safer. And this nursing home thing, being a nursing home worker in America was probably the most dangerous job in May of 2020 in the world. Like, it was a death, it was very bad. Nursing home workers also spread the virus from bed to bed. They spread it from home to home. They spread it because they traveled so many to work in different homes because their wages are so low. So they often had to work 2 or 3 jobs, often in different nursing homes. They took the virus from work into their own homes and infected their loved ones. Workers working that wage level are far more likely to live in intergenerational homes where there are older people and younger people and more densely populated quarters. So that very small little snapshot of a nursing home employment situation was had catastrophic effects. It was very different in Europe. It was not the epicenter of the disease in Europe. And so, but for America, this union effect is really strong. The other one is a little bit harder to read, but it's a fairly clear story. As was said, I'm on the school board. I'm interested in schools, and what this graph shows is a scatter plot that shows that the more densely unionized your school district is, the more likely it is to adopt a mask mandate. Mask mandates were very good, mediation measures against COVID. So this is for Iowa, the state of Iowa, which is a red state. Iowa actually illegalized mask mandates, right? It made it illegal. The only way you could get a mask mandate is if you pressured your school board to enact a mask mandate. And almost the only way you did that is if you had a union with a voice that was organized and that would not fear any sort of retaliation for doing so. So I talked to Trump 101 voters in Iowa who were also union leaders, and were like, look, I'm for Trump 100%, except at work. And at work, we got to have a mask mandate. It was like, in other words, the union effect really overshadowed the kind of political orientation of a lot of red state voters. And so, we looked at this data in other places. This just happens to be one example. But another example when union rates tend to increase public health measures. In both cases, which I think is important, these industries are good for all of us. It's really good if nursing homes in our communities are safer. Same with schools, because they brew disease and they spread it very easily. And so the more, we're coming up, it's going to be flu season soon. It's the same effect. And so the more densely unionized those places can be, the safer they are, the safer we are. This matters a lot especially for the future. This graph is a little confusing, but basically what it shows is that we often talk about the future of work, and all those articles that are about the future of work are about gleaming robotics offices and tech entrepreneurial magic and stuff like that. The future of work is in low-wage healthcare. The future of workers is a low-wage woman of color in scrubs. That is basically what the American economy is producing, and we cannot produce them fast enough. You see home healthcare and services, which is the yellow line, is growing the fastest, but those top three lines are compared to the growth of all other industries except healthcare. In other words, we're living in an economy for all kinds of reasons that needs and is producing more healthcare workers. It's also one of the most acute places of a labor shortage. We sort of hear bits and pieces about a nursing shortage. We don't really have a nursing shortage. We have 1/7 of all the registered nurses in the world, in America, 1/7. But they're not working as nurses anymore, right? They're leaving the profession, they're leaving the bedside in droves because those jobs are so bad. We don't need to produce more nurses in nursing school. We need to make sure those people with an RN degree want to be nurses and can sustain to be nurses at a decent living. I'm doing some research now on the situation with traveler nurses, and that sort of the gravy train that was traveling nurse during the pandemic is a little bit mellowing out. It's not what it used to be, and so people are sort of starting to challenge that organization of work a little bit. So today, I'll talk a little bit about what comes after. There is a long shadow of the pandemic. Now this book stops in basically 2021 because I had to stop writing it at some point. And I started calling a lot of people back who I'd talked to 9 months earlier. And they said, many of them had this slogan that they would say, which was, last year's heroes, this year's zeros. Because almost overnight, people forgot the sacrifices that essential workers made to the economy and to our lives. And people routinely lamented this fact and said, we're going to be right back where we started. And in many ways, I think they are right. Books like mine typically have a final chapter, which is thinner than the rest, which is about what is to be done. And it's always thinner because it's hard to know what to do, and because it's sometimes hard to find optimism, some sort of uplifting ending. And that is the case. I hate to say it. That is the case with this book. We have learned the things that we could have learned from the pandemic, we have almost not learned at all. In other words, when the next pandemic hits, if another pandemic hit tomorrow, our COVID preparedness for workers would be awful. It would be just as deadly as it was 3.5 years ago. There are things we can do, and I'll just say a few of them now and talk a little bit about where we are. We should obviously copy and paste many of the very simple social democratic policies that basically have to do with healthcare and time off from work that many rich capitalist democracies have, and institute them. The CARES Act was actually decent. Like, I'm not giving Trump credit for it, but we eliminated half of child poverty in a lot of major cities overnight by just giving people money, which is exactly what we should do as a poverty alleviation program. But we put money into the hands of workers like never before. When I was writing this book, workers still had $10,000 to $20,000 of pandemic relief funds sloshing around in their bank accounts. Inflation has decimated that for the most part since, but for a long time, the CARES Act and other kinds of redistribution mechanisms worked pretty well. We transformed our unemployment insurance system, and it was incredible. And just as quickly, we reverted back to the old broken system, which in about half of American states is absolutely dedicated to making sure that people do not get unemployment. That is like its stated mission. In Florida, I think 9% of the people who apply for unemployment insurance get unemployment insurance because the right wing is just, they annihilate it. Union renewal. Right now, about 7 to 8% of American workers are in unions. You can only be so powerful and so effective when you're such a small number. So there was a brief moment when there was interest in passing what was called the PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, and which will likely not pass. But it was blocked essentially by two major Democrats. But would that have passed would have radically rewritten the way labor law operates in America for the first time in 90 years since the New Deal, essentially. Everything that Amazon does to dissuade people from joining a union would be illegal under the PRO Act. We can get things like the PRO Act in bits and pieces, and to some extent, some of the Biden policies that happened recently are doing that. But it would have been better to get the whole thing. We can reduce our reliance on paid work, and this really gets back to the other book, the first book I wrote in 2020. There is, the pandemic. Countries around the world experimented with 30-hour work weeks and 32-hour work weeks. Sanders is calling for a 32-hour work week. Some major tech entrepreneurs have instituted a 32-hour work week. Ironically, it's the labor movement. The people who were originally, organized was for a shorter work week have not really caught on. But the reduction of our reliance on paid work would have made people safer at the same amount of money, of course. Would have made people safer and wealthier, and there's all kinds of policies and ways that we can do that. You don't have to be a socialist to endorse something like that. A note on the current strike wave. Since I wrote this book, Amazon basically made a historic organizing effort, which I never thought would happen. I interviewed Chris Smalls like 3 years ago. He was like, "We're going to get unions at Amazon." And I was like, "There's no way he's going to do that." And then they did it. And Starbucks, about a third of unionized Starbucks have been on strike at one point or another, which is an insane amount. Adjunct lecturers went on a rolling strike wave last fall and spring across the country. We had the actors guild, the writers, and then, of course, now we have the auto workers who were out on a historic strike. Some of this strike wave does still have to do with pent-up frustration, resentment, anger, and hostility that brewed during the pandemic. Some of it is just about bread and butter issues, about healthcare, good jobs, introduction of technology, and wages. It does have a telling thing, I think, for American democracy. As we begin to think about the next election, I think it's worth mentioning that, Trump recently made a high-profile visit to an auto plant in Michigan, and it was routinely reported that he was going to speak to striking auto workers. Trump went to a non-unionized auto plant, which doesn't have a union. We're definitely not on strike at any time. And to talk to those workers about basically the menace of immigration and replacing their jobs with low-wage workers from Mexico. Biden did go to a picket line for 12 minutes. It was the first time an American president had ever been to an active picket line. It's a good sign. Some people really took a lot from it, some people did not. Well, whatever you definitely have a conservative right-wing movement, which is trying to sort of capture the spirit of sort of a more militant working class, but with some sort of populist idiom and deflecting criticism from the employer onto other workers, onto other working class people. You have another party that is to some extent, in fits and starts, though, not enough, but still, voicing its support for labor. Biden began his presidency by claiming to be the most pro-union president in American history since Lincoln or whatever. That's a small bar in America because presidents are so anti-union, but still, he started out pretty good. He kind of flummoxed in the middle, and I think now there's a way in which he's trying to sort of regain some of that position as the election season gets closer. I'll leave it there. I'd love to answer any questions you have and talk more about this if there's anything left unsaid. So thank you so much for listening. Yes?
What's the American, quote, American attitude toward unions today? I've heard that it's becoming more favorable toward unionization.
Yeah, I wonder if I have a slide here. No. Yeah, it is. So about 61% of Americans voiced support for organized labor. So it's a historic high in my lifetime. There's also, strangely, a historic low, I think it's a 12% support for like corporate leaders or something. And so that spread is pretty interesting. About 51 to 52% of American workers say that if they could join a union tomorrow, they would. So, which is different than just, I would support a union or whatever. So those numbers are really good. They're a change. They show a gradual and pretty significant increase during the last 3 years for organized labor. The bad side to that story is that the organizing drive in Alabama to win a union at Amazon had so much public support. Celebrities came out, Biden came out, everyone was like, we need unions at Amazon. They got crushed, right? Totally crushed because Amazon crushed it. And so there was this sense, I think, from a lot of people that this sort of public support and this buzz would generate a win. And ultimately, the only thing that ever generates a win is 50% plus one people voting yes. And still in a workplace, that's a high bar. But that support is definitely there and growing. What else? Yeah.
I have a related question to that. We see a lot in the news now about antitrust lawsuits coming. Is there any correlation kind of with antitrust and unionization, or is that kind of like two separate spheres of labor relations?
Why are you thinking there would be?
Well, it just kind of goes back to what you were saying with the corporate distrust at the top. And so part of my thinking is that if there's so much distrust in like the management side of those, then that falls back on the workers, and so they're trying to keep that accountable.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think that is Yeah, I mean, the United States is weird. Like, it's a very, very odd capitalist democracy, if you want to call it that, because support for organized labor is so incredibly low. Like the right wing in major European countries they're never going to be like they're like fairly pro-union, right? Like the French workers rioted over changing the retirement age 2 or 3 years, right? I mean, it's a very different understanding. And so here, I think what you have is the major impediment to unions organizing is just simple management interference. Like they interfere and they meddle and they break the law every time, there's without consequence, without fail. That is the major impediment. I mean, there's a lot of other ways, like my job is illegal to join a union because of American labor law. It makes it illegal for me to be a part. My public college counterparts are unionized, but I am not because I'm in a private one. Doesn't really make any sense, but there's a precedent for that. So there's all kinds of ways in which workers are dissuaded from joining a union, and just good old management interference and policy are probably the biggest ones. Yeah. What else?
Wait, I'm sorry, can you clarify? You say because you are at a private university, you cannot unionize, or you just haven't been able to unionize?
No, it is illegal. So like it's not illegal, but we are considered, because I sit on committees where we can hire and fire, which technically under American labor law makes me a manager. And managers are, now of course, trust me, no one's listening to me on who to hire and fire at Middlebury College. It's totally ridiculous, and it's an insane categorization, but that's what it is. I mean, so we could, if we took a petition to Middlebury College and said the undersigned would like to join a union, they would say, we have no obligation to bargain collectively with you. And we would say, we know that, but nonetheless, but then it would just go back and forth. Whereas if we were at UVM, where they have a union, they would say, we have a clear path to collective bargaining, which is very different.
But for instance, the maintenance workers at Middlebury can unionize.
They could. They could. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Excuse me, I've lost my voice.
That's okay.
What do you see the post-COVID workplace looking like? Granted, now I know.
Yeah.
Increased accessibility, 24/7 ability to reach people. Zooms came into play. Zooms can take
Right.
place now at any time.
Right.
Who's benefiting from
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good question. And I may be writing a book on it, just because it is really, the world of work, really transformed by remote stuff. There was a study done recently that showed, I can't remember the exact number. It was in the hundreds of billions of dollars of empty, like unused real estate in major metropolitan areas of offices where just there's no money in, right? Like, what's going to happen to entire central business district dedicated to a white collar workforce that now wants to work from home? Because so many people do. And obviously, the only answer there is I don't know at this point. But there are, it has created some interesting, like it has driven the wages up of workers who are in remote jobs because there's so much competition for them. So that's one thing that's good. It has pressured other employers to be more flexible. Again, not to use myself as an example, but like Middlebury is not flexible, actually, in case anyone's listening. We cannot, at Middlebury College, we cannot teach remotely, which is fine, I don't care, I like teaching in person, but a lot of people do not. And that kind of flexibility that's afforded to a lot of places is a really growing trend. There's something else I wanted to say about it. it might come back to me. I think that there's, in general, a lot of people are sort of predicting like a decline in some of just the basic establishments that can't do remote. For example, restaurants just aren't coming back. Like the amount of, we regained about 70% of our restaurants. And that was pretty quick, and now it's plateaued. People just don't want to eat out as much anymore, and restaurant work is so bad, and you can't make it remote, so it's gone, and it's not coming back. So there may be things like that the remote dimension to other jobs has taken people away from other sectors where they previously worked in brick and mortar establishments. It's still a thing that's pretty in flux. So that's what I would say for now about it.
Well, I'll speak to her because she can't speak.
Okay.
But the flip side of that was you've sort of addressed what I'll call the flexibility side of remote work. The accessibility side that she was also asking about was, it's 9 o'clock at night and you get a text from your manager saying, hey, what about the ABC account or whatever.
Right.
So there's a trade-off between flexibility and accessibility.
Totally. This was true before the pandemic. I mean, France made a law, or I don't know, it was a law. They did something that made it so that when your boss emailed you after 6 p.m., it went to like some other place, right? So they could email you whenever they wanted, but you did not respond outside of work hours. Like you couldn't. Communication with coworkers is one of the main things people like about their jobs. That's what they report on public opinion surveys. So I don't think like taking away the ability of people to communicate after hours is good. But you're right that the flip side of flexibility is that sort of creep into your work life into your non-work life of work, and that was a problem before, and certainly it's probably a worse problem now. I don't know if, people began, and I do this now too, began putting at the bottom of their email signature something that says, my work hours may not be your work hours. So whenever I send this to you, feel free to respond when you are at work. And it's a silly little thing, but it's, I think, sort of a recognition of this larger problem that we all squeeze it in when we can, and but we don't expect everyone else to do the same thing, I guess. That might be one way of answering it. Do you have any questions? You're the other person here. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything I didn't say that's worth. Yeah.
This sort of macro question. So, well, maybe you address it, but I mean, a lot of workers disappeared during the pandemic and didn't reappear. I know there was a cohort that retired early, maybe they were maybe 63 and they just decided to fail. From a macro perspective, where did the workers go? And how do you address the inability to work because of
care?
Caregivers,
The working population, like percentage-wise, is not that much smaller than it was before. So I think there was, some early retirements. I don't know. I mean, where do you go if you're not working? You're not working, I guess, right? I mean, like so there has been an expanded safety net for some retirement ability. Part of the CARES Act, and then part of the other one after the CARES Act, which I can't think of now, did allow for some early retirement. Some companies and universities, other places, did begin to offer people packages to kind of move out when they were unsure if the economy would bounce back after the pandemic. Some of that happened. I don't know where people are if they're not working. I study workers, I guess. I know what they're doing when they're working, but I don't know what they're doing when they're not. They're just at home, I suppose. But I think probably that the degree to which people were able to stay retired who thought they would stay retired at that, maybe at that 63, 65, 66 cusp is probably smaller than we think, just because the overall percentage is still relatively similar. The pandemic is tough to study, and it's hard to write a book about something that's happening right now, which is what I did, basically. And now that it's happened, and that we're basically past it. It's hard to know like what happened during the pandemic, or what's happening now is a result of what's happening during the pandemic. How much explanatory power do we owe to that? I tend to think a lot. I tend to think that we, though as a society, as a nation, we didn't adjust our policies in ways that shows we learned something. However, American workers, I think, did learn that like their power matters for themselves, for their communities, and there's only one real way to exercise that power. It's unfortunate, but there's not like a million ways to do it. It's like you organize a union and you push back against management. There's not much else. And I think this strike wave 20, 21, 22, 23, there's always been, the petitions to file union elections are up 66% than they were in 2021, which is the largest jump in American history. Like there's so many people that want to join a union. The National Labor Relations Board, which is the government agency detailed with those elections, cannot keep up. Like when workers vote, their vote just languishes with the board for a very long time. Biden has improved the board recently, and those are starting to speed up. But it's a situation in which I think many of us and workers did learn some of those lessons. And those lessons are playing out right now in the auto workers strike to some extent. But our policy, culture, society, whatever, has not really kept pace as much. This.
I'm ready to speak.
Oh yeah, good.
Okay, I'm going to make a statement.
Oh great.
I don't know if you
This is the classic. This is more of a statement than a question. Is that what you're going to say?
No, well,
What either way.
I don't know if you follow the ski industry and how ski instructors have been paid in
Okay.
Vermont and other states. I am a ski instructor.
Oh, okay.
So with the pandemic, Vail Resorts
Uh-huh.
got a little uncomfortable
Right.
and did raise wages, and there was also several class action lawsuits
Huh.
out west.
Okay.
And there have actually been drastic improvements
In
since
working conditions.
in working conditions
Huh.
since 2019.
Why? Like what was the pressure to do that?
Holding on to their employees.
Oh, I see.
This was a difficult industry before that.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, we were only paid when we actually worked, and now we're actually paid from the time we're working.
Oh, that's cool.
We receive dining and lofting.
Right.
I mean, it's tremendous difference.
Oh, that's cool. That's great. A sort of similar thing happened to delivery drivers who were sometimes only paid when they were actively driving their vehicle. But when they are sitting there waiting for a delivery to come and go, they're not paid. But now increasingly they are. It'd be like if you work at a cash register and no one is in your aisle, you're still at work, right? Like you still get paid, and you don't just get paid when you're swiping grocery items. So I think that weird temporal dimension to like how people get paid switched for a couple industries. I had never heard of ski instructors, but that's cool.
And
That's interesting.
It's only in certain states. The state of Vermont was one where you can still just be paid for just the hours, but Vail has approved that. And the state of New Hampshire, whereas New York State pays more, and the state of California has a minimum for the number of hours from the moment you arrive. It all depends on where you go.
That's cool. That's great. I think there's a lot of these little micro stories that that pressure, either from labor market pressure, from, as you said, what would you call it? Sort of people are leaving the profession or whatever to keep people around. I mean, that's retention. Yeah. I mean, I'm dealing with this with schools right now. How do we retain teachers and aides and paraprofessionals when you compete with nursing homes and McDonald's for wages. You know, paraprofessionals is a pretty difficult job, actually, in a school. And it's just hard to recruit them, especially when it's expensive to live near the school that you're working at. You know, the good thing, I'm not a silver lining person, but wages for like these people who I talked about in the very beginning, oh yeah, I'll say that. This people at the bottom, their wages have skyrocketed since the pandemic. Like it's pretty interesting, actually. There have been 4 decades of wage stagnation, and post-pandemic, thanks to some extent to a labor shortage, thanks to labor organizing, tight labor market, their wages have gone up really like considerably. Inflation took off some of that for sure, but that's still a sort of a historic trend that's happening now. This thing is, I forgot this slide was either not up or up before, it was having difficulties. I didn't mention it. So the Ouroboros is this ancient symbol of a snake devouring its own tail. And in the book, I argue here and there that, you know, we think that shortchanging healthcare workers keeps prices low. We think that underpaying childcare workers helps make childcare accessible. And ultimately, those risks are liabilities that all of us suffer from. And to some extent, like our society, and during the pandemic, this is very clear, is to some extent like a snake eating its own tail. In other words, undermining the variability, our variability to care for one another that requires the system to take, capitalism relies on people to take care of each other via paid or unpaid work. If you have a system that undermines people's ability to do that, either with longer hours, stagnating wages, crappy health care, whatever it may be, that system is unsustainable. And so there's a negative story there in which we are all victims to a system that essentially is eating and devouring itself. It simply does not produce enough workers to take care of people the way they need to be taken care of, especially as our aging boomer population. The other way to read that story is that there are internal contradictions to essentially to the capitalist system that makes it vulnerable. And that there's a lot of people during the pandemic, labor organizers, workers in particular, who talked about exploiting those vulnerabilities from a strategic standpoint. To say like, you know, look, imagine drawing a picture of a system that just doesn't provide enough people to do healthcare. Like, if we lived in a socialist economy, everyone would be like, oh my God, socialism doesn't work. Capitalism doesn't work. It's not working. It's literally like, it's just not working. And there's not enough people to do the jobs because the system does not incentivize people to take those jobs. And when they do take them, it pushes them out. And so that is obviously a liability for all of us and a threat, but also sort of in some way an optimistic reminder that there are probably alternative systems that do that. In Europe, the food processing workers and nursing homes and hospitals were not, well, hospitals were, but those other two were not actually the epicenters of the pandemic. Like their work relations and work regimes were different, so that those things were far spread out in different industries, mostly because of labor conditions. So sometimes from this little, slogan or graph or whatever, and I think about their working conditions or our living conditions, all of us have a stake in making sure that people at the bottom of the income distribution have good jobs, and whether we hold those jobs ourselves or not. And I think, that's, for me, has always been sort of an animating principle. That's what that word means. Thanks for coming out to Manchester, Vermont. Thank you. So is this on TV? Is that what's happening?
It's on our website.
It's on your website?